Go for it,
So
man.
we are officially in the after show, and just again, the recording is running. So don't say that you didn't know the recording was running and that I might use this at some time. I'm going to use it. The recording's running. So don't speak if you don't want to be recorded at this time. Demon freaking possession. Oh my word. Talk about a hellscape of issues there. So I'm gonna go ahead and lower my desk to a sitting position because I'm tired of standing.
You did say no rules now, right? That was
there are no rules.
There's only
it is
rules.
underway.
There's only rules for you, Andrew.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
Please rearrange the following. David R. Please rearrange the following words into a phrase you understand. Me bite.
You know, that could have been aimed at anybody.
Well, I'm glad to see that it didn't take you as long as it usually takes to rearrange two words, David R. Well done. You're on your game.
I'm only trying to be like you, Andrew. You know.
Okay,
Nobody
look,
is
You've got a
sharp
long
and
way
witty
to
as
go,
you.
bro. Keep trying. Keep
No,
trying.
don't.
Okay.
Maybe
don't.
when you grow up.
Don't come on. Let the bickering start when the subject actually begins. Demon
Andrew
possession.
knows I love
He
him.
is
loves him.
demon possessed. Look, David Russell is the clear example of Christians being demon possessed.
I like David Russell despite himself, and we're going to make a decent human being out of him one day.
I got a question for the skeptics on the board. If you were going to propose a system for demon possession, how would you do it? Because I have my answer. I'm curious to see what your guys' answer is.
Okay, so if
Andrew's obviously me, so
I'm gonna jump in there because I can only speak with a former Christian hat on. My understanding of demon possessions were that a demon could possess almost anybody, almost at will. And I could not find any reason in scripture to believe that that stopped being the case. Although I come from a religious tradition that did not believe in demon possessions. So we believed that they happened, but we didn't believe that they continued to happen. We also didn't believe in miraculous healings and things like that either. So
such a boring religion.
Right,
boring.
but remember I asked you how, not what you believed.
Well, so I'm just saying, as far as the how goes, we didn't think about the how as much. We thought about because we just assumed that demons had unlimited, near unlimited power to possess. So the assumption was if someone is filled with the Holy Spirit, the demon couldn't possess that person. But if a person was just kind of spirit neutral, a demon could jump him.
Is that like a strawberry or lemon?
I don't understand the question.
Grapefruit, spiritual neutral.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, they're not a Christian, they're not a cult or anything like that. They're just a dude going to work. They could get jumped. And that's why you would need people who could exorcise demons to get them unjumped. But let me let someone else deal with it, because as far as the how of the jumping, just assume that they have the ability to do it. They just, in the same way that they could talk to you or influence you or whatever this nebulous power is that Satan has, you just assume that they have some kind of power to jump you.
Oh, I can tell you the exact details of that power if they had it. Because if you're just talking about influence, we are influenced by by our emotions and how we feel. You just give them the power to increase or decrease your dopamine, serotonin levels, and they can make you do just about anything, because those are what control ultimately what you think and everything else.
I mean, just give them a good marketing firm, right? I mean, it doesn't take a supernatural power to influence people. Some people buy Androids and some people buy iPhones, but the reason is the kind of marketing that we fall influence to, the sorts of
but that's not like a supernatural power. That's just marketing.
Right, but modifying dopamine and norepinephrine and norepinephrine in your brain isn't a superpower. We have SSRIs.
Well, no, but if you're doing it and you're actually introducing the chemicals into the brain, then that would be a superpower, right? I mean, you're breaking the third law of physics.
See, that I think is the interesting part, right? So when you say how is it done? Let's say they are introducing norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine into the brain. So they're fooling with the big three, right? And they're doing it supernaturally. That's the thing. That's the thing that has to be explained. How are they introducing a change in one of the big three into the brain supernaturally? What is that mechanism?
Well, I mean, if they create or destroy the chemicals, right, that would work.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is, how are they doing it? To just say they're doing it supernaturally doesn't actually answer the how question. It's like saying God made the universe through an act of great power. That doesn't tell us anything about the mechanism.
Well, this is kind of the question I got stuck at in the show too, is what's the workflow of how this happens. And I think, Darren, if I understand you, you're saying, well, they could just magically create dopamine.
Well, I mean, if you want more of an explanation than that, I mean,
I'm okay with that explanation. It's all BS to me.
Right. I mean, if we're just making shit up, but
it's what I thought you were asking though, Darren. I thought you were actually asking about a full-on mechanism, like how does it get done top to bottom?
Right, but I mean, if they've got like the supernatural thing, and the supernatural thing is capable of actually shaping the basic quantum waves, right? I mean, that's how nature does it.
Well, so let me just push the question a little bit further, which is, how does a demon jump you to possess you in the first place? So I'm my assumption, and any Christian can just step in if anyone dares to do it. My assumption is that a demon possession is an actual physical, and I'm using physical with scare quotes here because they're spirits, right? But it's some kind of entering, that they enter your being in a way that they were not in there before. So they come from the outside of you to the inside of you and take control of you. So that's what I mean by a physical possession. They have literally taken possession of you, not just influencing your mind. So how does a demon make that jump from being literally outside of you to literally inside of you in such a way that a exorcist doesn't just change your mind? An exorcist has to get the demon to physically leave your body. So how do they get in there?
Well, if the soul actually, I mean, the mythology includes the soul, and the soul, assuming, has some sort of connection to the physical body that controls it. So maybe the demon intertwines itself in that connection.
How? I mean,
I don't know. There's no rules for the supernatural. So when you say how like that, it's like, really make up any story you want, because the supernatural rules aren't defined anywhere.
But your soul is kind of inside your body, right? It's not outside your body. It's
not really. Because if you're talking to Dale, he's not here. He could explain it to you otherwise. But Dale, the last time I talked with Dale, he proposed that the soul doesn't actually take up any three-dimensional space.
Okay, so if your soul doesn't take up any space, three-dimensional space, and a demon's spirit doesn't take up any three-dimensional space, what does it mean to be possessed by a demon?
Well, what does it mean to have a soul? I mean, they're just throwing words together and hoping they make sense, which a lot of times they don't.
Andrew, what does it mean to be possessed by a demon? I mean, I don't even know how to get this topic off the ground. I don't understand it. I use physical because that's the only way I can understand it. That's what Christians are talking about. That's what Hollywood depicts. And I think that if Dale were here, if Matt Katak were here, rest his soul. I know he's here. If Russell were here, maybe they could explain what they mean by a demon possession in the first place. But I don't think that my description of it is wrong or being unfair to the Christian depiction of what they mean when they talk about a demon possessing a human being.
Well, and the
Here's
problem
the
is that
driving
there's
me.
no,
Sorry,
go ahead,
go,
Andrew.
go ahead there. Okay, all right, look, here's the things driving me crazy. If a demon doesn't have any three-dimensional capacity, it doesn't take up any space, just like the soul doesn't take up any space. To talk about three-dimensional space also requires that we talk about time. We talk about duration. Space and time are things that are linked in a way that they cannot be separated. So here's what I want to know. If a demon doesn't take up any space, does it also not take up any time? And if it doesn't take up any time, is it timeless in the sense that God is? And if a demon is then timeless in the sense that God is, because it doesn't take up space, and because it doesn't take up space, it necessarily doesn't take up time, then how does exorcism ever possibly work? A demon is timeless. You wave your temporal wand, you come up on the first of April, right? And you exorcise the demon on the 2nd of April. He's not there because you finish at midnight. The demon doesn't care, it's timeless.
Okay,
How
but
does
it's
exorcism ever work?
Yep.
look. Sorry, BP, will you please unmute your mic and say something reasonable? I've been waiting for a while. Please, there are no reasonable people talking right now.
That was
Anyway,
perfectly reasonable. It was a perfectly good business
not
plan.
reasonable. So here's the thing. You can't say that it's divorced from space, though. And the reason you can't say it's divorced from space is because the Bible gives us clear depictions of a demon getting in, or a demon inside a person, and then a demon being cast outside of a person and then into some pigs.
But you're
There's location.
Christians said. Wait a minute. You're blaming the skeptics for something a Christian said.
Well, this is the only way I can understand demon possession, because skeptics don't believe in demon possession because we don't believe in demons.
Right, but when
I'm
you
just
say it's not reasonable,
Well-
it's not us creating the unreasonable.
Right,
Okay,
and you'll
so-
never understand it because there are no rules for the supernatural.
But
They,
I also
they can't
want
tell
to
us
be
what it's made of. They can't tell us what the rules is. They can't tell us how it works or interacts with the.
But I want to be
interfaces
fair
or
to what
anything.
Christians believe. I want to be fair to what Christians say they think. And so, look, I can't help it if it sounds ridiculous, but I'm not straw manning anybody. There's a guy, he doesn't have a demon in him, then he does have a demon in him, and Jesus sends the demon out of him, and the demons go out and into pigs. We're talking about space and time and location and control of beings. And so the question is still reasonable. How in that worldview, never mind the worldview of reality, in that worldview, how does a person get possessed by a demon?
You'll never
As a preacher, I didn't know the answer to this question. You can say, well, you're a bad preacher. Great. But I've never heard any other preacher give me a good answer to that either.
Well,
So
it's because
Here's the
Christians have
dualist-
no model for how the supernatural works. Without that, you won't get any answer because they have nothing to base the answer on. It's sort of like asking someone from the Stone Age how we got a rover to Mars. They have no basis. They have no understanding of the basics of the physics that it takes to get a robot to Mars, or even how to build any of that. So they have no basis on which to explain any of that. So when the Christian has no basis for I'll just call it physics of the supernatural, they're not going to be able to explain how any of that works because they have no model in which to build an explanation from.
Andrew, you were a Christian.
Because David, when you were talking about Legion being filled with 1,000 demons, or whatever the number is, in that's going to be Matthew chapter 8, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's
So
just
he's wandering
many.
around
It's
and-
legion
okay,
being
but,
many.
But
Yeah.
here's the point. So you complained about space and time, but whatever demons are, even in that story, they don't operate by normal space and time rules. You've got many demons inside this one person. And then when they're cast out, these many demons do what? They each choose a different pig or whatever, and then all the pigs run down the hillside and
idea.
they perish in the sea.
No
So,
idea.
so my point is, when you complain that we're not being reasonable about space and time, and that you want an explanation that uses the normal rules of space and time that we talk about when we talk about sending a rover to Mars, as Darren pointed out, you're still not. When you appeal to that story, you're not appealing to normal space and time rules.
Okay,
They didn't
so
come out and walk from this dude over to the pigs and ride them down into the sea. There were a lot of demons. What size were they? What they look like? We have no idea. How did they get in the guy? We have no idea. How did they each choose individual pigs when they were cast out? How did they get from him to the pigs? How did they control the pigs and run down into the sea? Why did they? You're asking a question that even the story doesn't.
okay, but look. The
No,
reason
look,
this is,
you-
I'm trying to take this.
you
I
are
understand.
unreasonable.
I understand, but let me just tell you why I'm belaboring this issue some. I asked the participants who were on the show at one point in the show, do demon possessions happen today? And they both simultaneously said yes. And so this is a going concern. I'm just going to assume that this belief is pretty representative of Christianity today. And I think it is representative. I think that the answer yes is representative of mainstream Christendom today. And so it does bear the Christian inspecting this question. How does this demon possession happen if it does, in fact, happen today? Because Christians should be pretty wary of demons jumping them or jumping people that are, close to them who are not necessarily Christians. And so these questions of how, even though it seems like just useless rambling, does have a going concern for the Christian.
Sure, I'm
Being-
not dismissing
Dale?
the concern at all. I'm not dismissing the concern. What I am dismissing is your complaint that we're not being reasonable because we're not answering the question with the usual tools of space and time. We're not, because even the story at its best reading doesn't operate by the rules of space and time that we would use in any context that wasn't supernatural.
Sure. And I'm going to give you a virtual point for that. So don't spend it all in one place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I know how
Dale,
those things work.
well, Dale did say that I was possessed by a demon at the beginning of the show. So if you want to put me in a lab somewhere and
I
try to figure
think-
it out,
I think he was being facetious, just to be fair to Dale. There are times when he might say something like that when he's not being facetious, but I'm not sure that he's actually
he's-
ever accused us
Yeah.
in a non-ironic way of being possessed by a demon.
I don't know. I've gotten at least one email from him where I'm pretty sure
Don't-
he wasn't trying to
don't-
be ironic.
Don't mention an email sent from another god.
I'm just saying
you
that I've got at least one example of him not being ironic about it.
believe that Dale has been non-ironic in at least one case. And look,
Yeah.
Dale has said similar things to me, and I have to parse when I hear this sort of thing. Is this Dale actually believing that that a demon is in possession of me or not? And I can honestly say that in all of my time of knowing Dale, I don't think he's ever made that accusation of me, but he could clear it up. I mean, if he listens to the show at some point when it airs, it would be interesting to know, because I think that Dale kind of uses the language rhetorically. And I can't think of a time when I thought he was actually saying that literally someone was possessed. Although I think that, even though I don't know if Dale was on the show at that time, I do believe that he also thinks that demons can possess people and do possess people. And so the rules of this possession are a kind of interesting thing, because even as non-Christians, we have to deal with this as we deal with Christians who believe that people are walking around possessed by a demon. And so it would be nice to know how to talk about what they are feeling and how to think about what they are feeling, so that we can have a rational conversation with them about it. And I'm going to go ahead and say maybe controversially, I don't believe that Christians are irrational who think that way. I do think they are misguided. But it is hard to have a rational conversation about a thing that you don't understand the rationale for. And so I am trying to come up with some kind of rationale for how this demon possession thing works in the minds of Christians, because as a Christian, it never worked in my mind at all. Now, Darren, I know that you were not a Christian and it never worked for you, period, but no one expected it to work for you. Andrew, did it ever work for you in your mind at all? Did you ever have any kind of coherent story for it?
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, let me back up one step and ask you a question. You said maybe the Christians weren't, maybe they're not crazy for this belief. Or that's not exactly what you said. Words.
Yeah, I said I don't think they're irrational. I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question that you would ask anybody else that said that same thing. And I think this is going to be telling for all of us, because I don't think you'll be able to answer the question. I don't think either of the rest of us could either. For them to be irrational in this belief, what would they have to add to the story from your perspective to make it irrational?
Well, you're pushing me into an old conversation and probably an old argument that we've had that I'm not going to have here today. Nice try, but I have said, and I will go ahead and say it again and court controversy. I don't believe that anybody is being irrational. I believe that, but I define rational. I actually had this conversation on the board. I define rational as people doing the best they can with the information they have, because nobody is purposely wrong. Nobody is a villain in their own story. The world coheres together for them in some way. Now, I didn't say that they were, to borrow some Plantinga, that they were warranted. I believe they're very unwarranted. But I don't believe that they are irrational in that they are acting against their own thoughts and in their own judgments. So that's how I define being rational. It would be if I believed that crossing the street without looking both ways was dangerous, and I put a blindfold on and crossed the street, that would be irrational. So I don't think they're being irrational.
So that's interesting. I actually think the example argues against their rationality. The example that you just used of putting on a blindfold when you know that crossing the street is dangerous. So I think that works against Christian rationality, the notion that they are being rational, because in this very show, just within the last 3 hours, there was no attempt to define how this worked. We can clearly define how walking across the street with a blindfold is dangerous. We can do that without any trouble at all. But when they were put to the test about demons, about the operation of Satan, about what God's motivations were and what Satan's counter motivations were, about what Satan's origin was, and whether God could possibly win against Satan, which only came up sort of briefly, and I wish it'd come up more. There was no real answer. And anybody that listens will hear the frustration from the one skeptic there, because there was no. So I actually disagree that by the example you used, Christians are rational.
Yeah, I know you don't. I know you do. But I would just say that the reason I don't think Christians are being irrational is because they have a different model of the world. So part of rationality is what your model of the world is. So if you have a model of the world, for instance, that says there are monsters under the bed in the whenever the lights go out, you're not irrational for being afraid to get up in the dark. You're wrong. You're unwarranted, but you're not irrational. So I don't think that the fears of children are irrational at all. They have been told all kinds of stories about the way the universe works and the kinds of things that are in it. And so believing those things, at least for a while, is not an irrational thing at all. And I think that Christians have been taught for a very long time about the way the world works, about the way the universe works, about this other world and other universe, and the creatures in it. And I don't think that so whereas they're wrong, and I feel for them, the fact that if that's your background information, you're not irrational for believing it.
Yeah, see, and I would only agree with you if their model was actually coherent. The problem is that their model's not coherent. It's not even really all that consistent.
Yes, and so I am actually doing the harder thing, and I'm taking a few slings and arrows to attempt to come up with some kind of coherence with this, because I would think, if we had done the show on demon possessions, and if I had made that point one, I think the show would have been over at point one. Right? That's there's just no way for it, at least for me, in my mindset, to make this coherent. Like I said, when I was preaching from the pulpit, I couldn't make the story coherent. I'm just glad that I wasn't from a denomination who believes in demon possessions, but I couldn't have explained it even then. If I was talking about the way it used to be, there's no coherent story that I could tell to make it make sense. And clearly, in the minds of Christians who believe this stuff, I'm just assuming, I might be wrong about the assumption, that they do have a coherent story. And I'm just trying to either get Christians to tell me what it is, or to try to suss out what it could be, to form some coherence around this. Because at the very least, if you got a God who's kind of watching over things, and you would think that a demon jumping somebody and possessing them would be out of bounds, right? That would be, if you're in a sports analogy, that's a foul. A referee would blow the whistle. You can't do that. If you're playing football and you pull out a knife, maybe Klingon football, that's okay. In American football, that's not okay. People step in to stop that kind of thing, right? So one wonders how God would have ever allowed a demon possession in the first place. That's so far out of bounds.
I think the problem that you're having is you're assuming they actually have thought about it for more than 5 minutes. I think what's actually happened is someone told them it happened. They just accepted it without actually thinking too much about it, and then started repeating it. And I mean, it's like when you were grilling them today on the show, every time they had to stop and think about it, they actually had to stop and think about it and try to come up with some story that kind of made sense, and they were contradicting themselves all over the place. And then one subject contradicted another subject with the stories that they're trying to explain with those. And I think that's the problem. I don't think it's that they have a coherent structure and you just aren't able to get them to tell you what it is. I think they just don't have a coherent structure, and they're trying to avoid letting you know that they don't actually have anything other than the words demon possession behind this story.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a coherent structure when I was a Christian either. And it was, I don't know exactly when it came to my knowledge that I didn't have a coherent story, because you don't know that at the beginning. But at some point you think about it enough and you read it enough and you realize, yeah, this doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Was it like that with you, Andrew? Did you ever feel like it was coherent and then come to realize, oh, wait a minute?
Yes, I did. And this is going to have to be my last words for the after show. Even though this may air after next week's show, I'll save the rest of my powder for next week.
Okay. I'll be honest with you. This will probably air with this show, because then I won't have to edit it.
So let me say before I answer that question, Darren, Luke, Brian, greatly appreciate you guys. Loved being in the chat with you. David, thank you for letting me participate as always. So I did accept that demon possession happened all the way back into the Old Testament. And the thing that troubled me was that Old Testament magic, because that's really what was in my head. I don't care that that we sort of taught about biblical magic differently than sword and sorcery magic. It was all magic. It was the ability to do things that humans couldn't do. And the Old Testament magic worked differently. You had magic artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant, right, or artifacts from the temple, right, and those things were magic.
Or bones of a prophet that could just
Bones of a
miraculously have a man
Well,
come back to life when he's dumped in the grave with the bones.
Right, frankly, trees that could kill in a supernatural way, trees that could condemn a whole race, right? Talking snakes, magic donkeys, bushes that could be burned with fire and unconsumed, water from rocks. I mean, there's we could go on and on and on. And yes, I accepted those things because the adults around me accepted them, and then I went to school, and the instructors that I trusted accepted those things, and I just figured that eventually I would get my temple card, right? I would eventually understand it all myself. But the benefit of being the kind of Christian that I was, and the kind of Christian that you are, David, the benefit was that I didn't have to think over much about it, because frankly, all that crazy stuff stopped somewhere around the time of the completion of the New Testament, when the faith once delivered, right? And so once the apostles had set down what they had to say, the magic ceased, and I didn't have to worry about the mechanism. Largely, I think that's what Christians do today. They don't worry about the mechanism. They just trust that because it was written down, or because their teachers think that these things happened, they're willing to accept it uncritically. And if I have one hope, it would be this: that whether you agree or not with the skeptics here that think these things have ceased, you would do the thing that Darren Lute would ask, that David Johnson would ask, that Brian would ask, that I would ask. And that is, try to actually understand it. Try to make sense of miracles. Come up with a way that not only you can balance the story inside your head, but that you can fit miracles into this world in a way that doesn't break science, and in a way that doesn't break your own everyday experience of the world. Because once you start on that path, I think miracles are doomed.
Well, the thing is, I didn't have a problem fitting miracles into the story per se. Good miracles in particular, because you could always say, well, but God wanted that to happen. God wanted the donkey to talk. God wanted the water from the rock. He wanted the man to be raised. You can point to that and kind of tell a story, and God can do anything, and so he wanted to do it. It's a little bit harder to explain the ones where, say, a necromancer is talking to a dead person. God couldn't possibly have wanted that, right? I mean, and yet we have necromancy as a going concern, both in the Old and New Testament. We have sorcery in the Old and New Testament, and God couldn't possibly want this other power to be going on. And so it's a little bit harder to explain how that could happen. And so when you get to when you raise the bar all the way up to demon possession, this is the ultimate demonic power that should not happen. It should not be possible, because you can't tell a story unless you just give up and go full Molinism. I'm going to stop thinking about it. God must have a reason. You can't come up with a story where demon possession is a good thing that God wants to happen on this earth. And if you have a God where you say, well, yes, but he wants demons to be able to possess people, well, then you don't have the God of a story that I care about anymore. I'm done with that God. If he is carrying out his great plan by wanting demons to possess people, we're done talking, because I can't. I not only can I not come up with a story for that, I don't want to come up with a story for that, because I would feel like I'd be doing my brain damage to actually come up with a story where that's good.
Yeah, it's one of the drawbacks to having a religion that's evolved from a polytheistic religion into a monotheistic religion. You've got all these um, artifacts from the early times of the religion that are still in there, and no one really understands why they're in there, and they screw everything up for you for making a coherent story.
Right. Polytheism actually makes so much more sense of a world, and you don't even need a Satan. If you have a type of polytheism where you have other gods, you can even call them minor gods, lesser gods.
I don't know that you can go that far.
Well,
Because
I'm
you
just
have-
even if you did that though, I think it still makes more sense, because then you can say there are other gods doing things in the world that ultimate God isn't doing. You know, you can offload the problems with the world onto something other than your God, and you don't have to invent a single Satan creature to take all of that weight.
Well, I don't think that works well, it depends on the god that, I mean, if it's like an Egyptian first god, or, the Greek pantheon or something like that, then you could probably get away with it, but not when you're talking like the Christian God, where he's got all the omnis. Because even the lesser gods doesn't work. You'd have to do something like Zoroastrian, where the Satan character and the God character are of equal power, or you do something like the what's his name? The guy that betrayed Jesus.
Judas.
Yeah, do the cult of Judas, what they did, and where Jesus was, where Christians had got it completely wrong, and so there's the secret hierarchy of gods where the Christian God was at the lower end of the hierarchy and just telling everyone that he was at the high end.
Right, but what you could maybe have though, even with ultimate God, there is something like the henotheism. I think that's the word that the Jews actually had. They weren't really monotheistic until much later. Is the idea that there are a bunch of gods, but that God was the one true God. He was he was the one most powerful God, and it explains their behavior a lot better, because they would go off and worship other gods because maybe they would be convinced, well, maybe this God is more powerful right now, because look at these people are flourishing and our people aren't. So they did believe that there were other gods. It was just a matter of who they should be faithful to at any given time. And then the God of the Old Testament, you could say, well, he had no intention of knocking off all the gods all at once. Maybe he just kind of took them one at a time as they annoyed him. And so there were lots of things happening in the world back then, lots of things that could be explained by other gods. And then as he knocks them down one by one, by the time we get to the New Testament, you've got maybe one or two gods left. And then he finishes them off. And so, but then you'd have to come to a place where we don't have demon possessions anymore, because God has killed off all the other gods. But that's not the world that we have, right? So you can't, that still doesn't work. Because at some point you have to say, yeah, well, God's okay with demon possessions. And I think that it falls apart there. The demon possession is the one demonic superpower that you can't have in a Christian framework.
Right, but it's only a problem because God is supposed to be all the omnis. If God wasn't all the omnis, which a lot of the apologists try to get him out of, to make it work, then it no longer becomes a problem.
So let me ask let me just throw out a couple of things that Andrew and I talked about yesterday. I know that he wanted to be here for this conversation, so I just want to throw some things out there for thought. So one of those things would be if God is so concerned about not overriding free will, And if a person got possessed by a demon, we must assume that it's because they are sinners of some kind. They've opened up a demonic gateway into their heart. Then who the hell is a priest to come along and exorcise the demon? Because it seems like you are just overpowering someone's free will because they freely allowed themselves to have this consequence of being possessed by a demon. So by what right do we ever have an exorcism?
Well, yeah, but the Christians don't believe in a God that doesn't want to override free will to begin with. I mean, when you have the apologetics that God's connection to us is what keeps us doing good, then that means he's constantly overriding our free will with that connection so that we do good rather than evil. So it's, or if you've got, God giving you a sign, like, God saved me this parking spot. Well, what did he do? He had to have overridden anyone's free will that wanted to park there so that they wouldn't park there. So the Christians don't actually worship a God that values free will, because they think he interferes with their lives all the time, finding out their keys or doing all this stuff that overrides free will so that all these things happen.
So let me just ask this question. By the way, this was Andrew's observation, so I thought I would give him some credit there. But I just want to pile on to that observation a little bit. If I purposely, through some stunt or other, because I'm trying to understand all of the supernatural possibilities out there, open myself to a demon to possess me, would I be a candidate for someone to exorcise the demon from me? Would any Christians even want to exorcise the demons, or would they shrug and say, "Ah, you brought it up on yourself"? What should the Christian think in that situation? Well, yeah, I did this stupid thing, but now I got a demon in me. What should the Christian do at that point? Should I get an exorcism, or should I just be stuck with a demon for the rest of my life?
I don't know.
I don't either. I mean,
Most
I know that you're not a Christian, and so it's hard for you to put your Christian hat on. I was a Christian. I don't know the answer to that question.
Most Christians seem to think the exorcism is the right way to go. I mean, you have people dying from exorcisms all the time, so they obviously think it's a good idea.
So do you think anyone would come around and try to exorcise me?
Maybe if you advertised on eBay or something.
No, but no one possessed by a demon is asking anyone to exorcise them. They're possessed by a demon. They're not asking for an exorcism. No exorcism ever happened as a result of the possessed asking to be freed of the demon. That's simply not how it ever worked. And so the very idea of an exorcism is that you are overriding, you're going against a free will being or a free will demon, and you're going where you were not asked to be unless it was by some third party to get rid of this demon. So I wouldn't be the one asking for an exorcism. Some Christian would simply have to recognize that I was possessed and take it upon themselves to do it. And I'm just wondering if any Christian would even want to.
I guess so, because I think they would think of it as like you're comatose in a car accident with the car on fire, so that they're going to run over and help you get out of the fire because you're not in a place to help yourself. So I would guess that's how they would treat it.
Sure. Even if you were a drunk driver, we would deploy all of our ability to save you from a burning car, and
Right.
someone would risk their life to get you out of the car.
Yeah, isn't that the whole point of missionary work, is to go to people who didn't ask for your help and try to tell them they're wrong?
I suppose it would be an interesting experiment. So great. If demons can possess us today, another one of those kind of thought experiment type questions. How do we know it? How do you know when you've been possessed by a demon? And if there's an exorcism, how do you know when the demon's gone?
Oh, that's an easy one. It was answered in the show. Basically, if you don't believe what the Christians say about their religion, then you're possessed by a demon, and then they know that it's been exorcised when you start believing what they say about their religion.
Well, now that's not quite right. What they said was that the job of the devil was to blind you to the truth. That's not the same as a possession. And I would also say, for anyone listening, so if you get into some of the Pentecostal charismatic religions, this is a whole different deep end of the crazy pool. I'm just telling you that right now. This goes real deep there, real fast. But what they would tell you is there's a difference between a demon possession and a demon. They have another word for it, demonic, kind of, they try to make a distinction between a demon that's actually inside of you, possessing you, and a demon that's outside of you, harrying you. And there's a word for that, and I can't think of it right now. So the idea of Satan influencing you would not correspond with the Christian idea of demon possession.
Satan's not a demon.
Isn't he?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, God's not
I
an
mean-
angel, right?
I mean,
He's God, but
Right, but
Satan
isn't
was
Satan-
an angel.
And aren't all the other angels turned into the demons because they fell?
Right, but so Satan's kind of the head of the fallen angels. Would we call Satan a demon? I don't know. That's above my pay grade. He's chief of the fallen angels.
Right. but if the fallen-
Ontologically, he's an angel. I think that you'd have to say all
Right, the other-
demons are ontologically angels.
Right, but that doesn't answer the question. I mean, what makes a demon a demon? If a demon is just the word for a fallen angel, and Satan is a fallen angel, isn't Satan sort of his title or name rather than something different than a demon? Sort of like the difference between an ape and like a human.
So this is so there's some nuance here in this question. So I'll go ahead and trot it out here. Can Satan possess a person? Demons obviously can possess people, but is Satan of the same class and character where he can personally possess you? Or is it something he can do but wouldn't because it's beneath him? If he can do it, it seems like he would be more powerful at doing it, so he could possess more powerful people, one would think. Is this a power that Satan has? And if he doesn't have it, why do the other fallen angels seem to be able to do it? Just an interesting thought.
Do you need to smoke weeds or anything just to get your mind around this?
Yes. But it's crazier than that. So we can go down the rabbit hole a little further. So Satan, let's say he does have the power to possess, but doesn't do it for whatever reason. Sorry,
So
I'm
does
trying
that
to
make Satan's possession different than the other fallen angels' possessions?
Yeah,
Do the rules change?
yeah. Okay, so why isn't everybody who's not a true Christian possessed? why isn't if they can do it?
How do you know they're not?
I don't know, but I mean, if they can do it, why isn't everybody possessed? And we know that it doesn't have to be a one-to-one kind of demon to human possession. So why? Also, in this spiritual war, I don't want to leave possession quite fully yet, but can demons die?
And if they do die, where do they go after that?
I don't know, but you're too far down the pit here. Can demons die? And can angels die? Because if there's this war that's been going on since forever, wouldn't you think that one side would have just died out by now? I mean, there were more angels than demons, because Satan only took a third of the angels.
Well, isn't the wages of sin death? So wouldn't that suggest that since the angels sinned, they brought death on themselves?
Well, fine, but they don't seem to be dying in this war. So what does it take to kill them?
Well, because the war is just one side or the other taking over the free will of the humans and forcing them to do.
But there's
things they
more
normally wouldn't do.
angels than demons. There are at least 2/3. Mathematically speaking, this doesn't make any sense unless the demons are just so much more powerful.
Well, that's
There
possible.
are at least
Satan thought he was
2/3.
going to actually win.
There's 2 to 1. I mean, what's the ratio here? 2/3 angels, 1/3 demon.
Well, I mean, if you think Satan's actually intelligent, then he would recognize the numbers. So and you don't go up against twice your numbers in a war unless you think you actually have a way to win that. So I'm guessing just logically he would have the most powerful angels on his side.
Yeah, I'm not sure that he's wrong.
Yeah.
Because the war's still going. So if they were of equal power, the war would be over just by the numbers.
Well, yeah, and if it's the pride in their own power that convinced them to rebel, then it would make sense that Satan would have all the most powerful angels.
Okay, so if Satan has the most powerful angels, the angels can't win.
Well,
So-
there's more of them though.
But they can't win because they all have the weak and stupid ones who stayed.
Right, but if they
And the
don't
more-
sin, then they don't have death with them, right?
Okay, but apparently Satan doesn't have any death on him either, because his angels are still going strong. Can they reproduce more demons? I mean, is there a demon making factory? Is God still making angels? I mean, how are they replenishing the war? Because if we're talking about beings that can die, I don't care if you're talking about supernatural beings or not. If they can die, if there's a meaningful war where they can do damage to each other, it can't go on forever.
Why
It
not?
just can't, because they would run out of fighters at
Well,
some
I mean,
point.
if it's God's plan to have a spiritual war, then why can't he just make sure that each one has just enough oomph not to die?
Right. Well, so you've just described something even more evil than the idea of the war itself, which is a war with fighters that can't die, because there's no way to end the war. The war, in other words, the war doesn't end by one side or the other winning the war.
Well, that's that's the Norse mythology. Humans die to become soldiers in the army, and then if they quote unquote die, then they're just sent back to the halls to drink and go to war again the next day.
Can a person who has been possessed but has been since exorcised, cleaned out, can they be possessed again?
You mean, do they have like an inoculation against it for like 6 or 9 months, or like we do
Right.
with viruses?
Right. Can it, do they need a booster exorcism, or
I don't know.
I mean, can
That
they
is an
be
interesting
possessed
question.
again?
That is an interesting question. Can we make an MRI vaccine against demon possession?
Yeah, I mean, how long does the possession? Because here's the thing: the person was possessed because they were some kind of sinner in the first place, right? And they didn't ask to be unpossessed. So a person comes along and unpossesses them. So they go right back to the bar and grab the Ouija board and get possessed again. I mean, what is even the point of exorcising a demon if a person could be possessed again?
Well,
And
maybe
that demon, same question. Can a demon that's been cast out of one person just possess the next person over?
maybe that's why exorcisms usually involve a lot of physical abuse of the person being exorcised, so that they don't just accept the demon right back in.
So these are the kinds of questions that have come up over the years, and things that I've thought about for years. I could go on this way for a long time. I have not exhausted the crazy pool here of the questions that you can ask of demons, but we were talking earlier about the story being incoherent, and why I said I could have started with demon possession. That could have just been the show. That would have been it. We'd have been done in 10 minutes. But these are the kinds of things that make the story incoherent, not just hard to believe. I can deal with hard to believe. I can't deal with incoherent. 1 + 1 can't make 3. And that's what you get with a demon possession story.
Yeah, 1 + 1 actually can equal 3. You just have to change the rule conservation laws.
Loot, I strangle you. I don't know if this is how this works or not, but consider yourself strangled. Do I need to choke a chicken to make this happen? You, sir, have been strangled. Yeah. So this is crazy making, and to try to get a Christian to sit down and talk about these things rationally when you're a Christian is impossible. Which is why Christians don't talk about this stuff. Who are they going to talk about it with? Who are you going to ask?
I wonder
Right?
if this is why they had hallucinogenics in their incense burning things in the first century.
Yeah, I suspect there were all kinds of mind-altering substances, if you will. But you're also dealing with people who are just sharply superstitious. And once again, I don't find them irrational for being superstitious. This is their model of the world. This is how it worked for them. They didn't understand how angels and demons work any more than the average person understands quantum physics today.
Yeah,
Now, the average person believes that quantum physics is true at some level, but they don't understand it.
Well, yeah, but you would think after 6,000 years they'd rectify that.
Yeah, but nobody lives 6,000 years. They just live in the time that they live in with the stories that they have.
Right, but I mean, you would expect, at least the priests to understand, even if the people in the pews don't.
The priests are the products of their time. They're just slightly upjumped apes in different hats. They're not a better class of person or a higher quality. Maybe they're slightly smarter.
Well, it only took us 100 years to figure out, the formulations for quantum physics and how it works. I mean, they've had 6,000 years to try to figure out how the supernatural works, and they still haven't.
Yeah, but I mean, they
been able to
started
even show that it exists yet.
They started without the invention of wheels or fire. I mean, so we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we learn more faster today because we have been there. So I'm not sure that we would have learned it any faster had we been in their place, and that they would have learned any slower had they been in our place. That was just the knowledge that people had of the world in that day, at that time. Education wasn't very good. No one could read. And stories of gods and demons were all you had. So I don't blame them for not having coherent answers to these things. Once again, even I don't have coherent answers to how quantum physics works. I can read books, which I have. I can talk about it at a very, very low level, which I do.
Right,
I
but
don't
we do have
understand it.
right, but we do have experts that maybe don't fully understand it, but at least have a good idea of how it all works.
Right, but they thought they had experts on how their world all worked too.
So what happened to all the experts?
Well,
I mean,
I
if
don't
they
know.
had experts 6,000 years ago and they don't have any now, then that seems like they're bad, you know?
Well, I mean, yeah, well, they were bad, but maybe they were all possessed by the demons. I mean, look, this is this is this is how their thinking would have gone. I can't tell you experientially what it's like to think like a primitive person, but we have to accept that they were primitive people.
Yeah, they had the
And
same brain structures we do now, so their
yes, but
thinking's
they
going
were,
to be fairly similar.
once again, they didn't have as many shoulders of giants to stand on as we do today.
Right, but they
Um,
still exist today, right? So, I mean, the people today don't have any excuses, right?
Well, there are a lot of people here today whose brain structure and all of that is still the same as those primitives. I mean, I mean, there are parts that are isolated by culture. So Aborigines people. I'm not going to say that Aborigines people are stupid. I don't think they are stupid, but they haven't developed in the same way as you and I have developed. They are
Uh,
as
I
primitive
I
as the
think my
people
point
walking around in Jesus' day.
I think my
Maybe
point is that
more
if
primitive.
I think my point is that if the supernatural actually exists, and there are people that claim to be able to detect the supernatural and what it's doing, then they don't really have an excuse for 6,000 years of still not being able to demonstrate that the supernatural exists.
Well, I would agree with you there. Look, if you create a God story where you've got an all-powerful, all-loving God who's guiding you through this world, you don't have any excuse to have a world view that is incoherent. So I think there's a way to judge people who told these stories, but not you've also got to realize that not everybody in those cultures believed in a god any more than everybody believes in a god today. And so the narrative of the religious is that everybody believes in a god, everybody's like us, and that's not true. Furthermore, it has never been true. I would argue that it's never been true that everybody believed in a god.
Yeah, I think the last poll done for the Christians in the UK that actually identify as Christians, something I want to say it was in some insane number, like 50 or 60% of them don't actually believe in the supernatural part of the religion.
Right, and there are a lot of people who are quote unquote churched Christians today, people who are cultural Christians who don't actually believe in a God, but their culture is tied up in the God story. And so it's just this idea that everybody who walked around 4,000 years ago believed in either Yahweh or Baal is just I don't think that's true at all. I think very much like today, the average person was probably just a person pulling a cart and an ox trying to get some food out of the ground. And they were probably not overly concerned about these types of things. Where does the rain come from? Why does the ground shake sometimes? I mean, these are things that philosophers, because they wouldn't have had scientists at that time, these are things that philosophers would have thought about. I don't think the average person would have been overly concerned about this stuff. And so if you would ask the average person back then, how does a demon possess a person? Are you worried about a demon possession? I think the average person would have said, what?
Yeah,
I don't think it would have made any more sense to them than it does to us today. But being primitive, they lived in a worldview where, some of their greatest philosophers believed that this stuff was true. And so they would have just shrugged. I don't know. Must be true. That guy over there believes it and he's wearing a nice hat.
Yeah,
So
but that's not understanding or anything. That's just sort of accepting what people have told you. I mean, that's sort of where we
Right, but
started this whole
I think,
conversation.
but I think that's what most of them are left with, which is why I don't blame them for not having coherent answers about it. It's just what people told them. Think about the story of Santa Claus being told to children. It's not coherent. The story of Santa Claus is not coherent. It's a ridiculously stupid story. It's so ridiculous and stupid that even 8-year-olds can work their way out of it without help. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's dumb. It's just incoherent.
Well, I don't think they would be able to if all their parents actually believed it and were telling them it was true and their society was telling it was true and all that.
Well, maybe, which is the Jesus part of the Santa Claus story. And I would agree there. But once again, they don't understand it. They don't understand the Jesus story. They don't understand the angel story or the demon story. They just know it has to be true because that's what people have told them. And we haven't been given permission to not believe it. So they have to believe it. And so they can say, well, I believe it, but I don't understand it. And you can say, well, that's irrational then. But I don't think that's irrational.
I don't think it's irrational because they believe it. I think it's irrational because they don't have any coherent story behind the belief. It's one of those things that, I mean, yes, I can believe that pixies fly around and break the laws of physics because of some supernatural thing, but if I don't have any reason why I believe that other than someone just told me it, I don't think I'm being rational to believe that because I have no coherent reason to actually believe it.
If every time the Christian trots out the Molinistic answer that, yeah, this thing that you've raised is an interesting question, but I believe that this is the world that God needed to make, or this is the thing that God needed to do because God has greater purposes than I can understand. What they're actually saying is, I believe it, I don't understand it.
Yeah, they're not being rational at that point.
I'm gonna continue to insist they're being rational, but I understand why someone would say that they are not being rational because we are not living in the world of primitives, and so we don't get as much of a pass as the primitives got, and we have responsible jobs in this world. A lot of us where we have to apply things like reason, where we cannot, for instance, as a writer, I cannot in my job just propose something and say, I believe it, I don't understand it. Got to be some greater purpose for it. I would never be published. I would be fired on the spot. We don't think that way. And all of the Christians on the panels have jobs that they have to think like moderns. They don't think like primitives in any part of their life. And yet when they come to something difficult in their religion, they're all too happy to say, I believe it, don't understand it.
I don't
and
even think it's
that's where I think you could make the case that maybe they're not being rational at that point. But they're at the very least, you can make the case that they're not being consistent because that's not how they think.
well, I don't even think it's just a matter of what they don't understand. I think it's actually at the point where their internal moral compass is bumping up against what they are seeing that God is actually doing. And so in order to preserve this idea that God is completely moral, they have to completely abandon their own moral compass and say, well, I don't understand it. I'm not omniscient. God is. So because I've got this preconceived notion that God is good and has to be good, then obviously there's something wrong with my moral compass. So I'm just going to have faith that God is good and he has a sufficiently moral reason to be doing all this crap.
Right. And I think that's the beginning and end of the story when it comes right down to it. The story has to begin with them. The beginning of the story is that God is good. In fact, there's a mantra that happens in churches where the one in front says God is good, and then the congregation responds all the time. This is one of these call and answers that you can actually get in lots of churches, lots of denominations all over the world. So it's a very, very common call and answer. But it
Someday I'm going
starts,
to go into a church and call Zeus is good
that's
and
not
see
going
what
to work.
happens.
It's not going to work. You're not going to get it all the time there. You're going to get a visitation by the deacons. And it will not be subtle. But yeah, it starts with this presuppositional idea that God is good. They don't have to, that's where the story starts. And so no matter what you say about the story after that, no matter what cognitive dissonance they face after that, they can just overwrite it with God is good.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning and end of the story for them. There is no hard question that you can ask a person that way, where they won't just say, yeah, I don't really get that, but God is good. He's got a plan. He's good. And when that's a tool that you have, you have stopped thinking. You're no longer in the enterprise of examining your faith and thinking rationally as a human being. You have given up on thinking rationally as a human being, because the one and only thing that matters to you is God is good. I don't have to answer that question because God is good. I don't have to understand that thing because God is good. I understand that that's inconsistent, but God is good. Yes, the story is incoherent, but God is good. You see, you're not in the process of humaning at that point anymore.
Yeah, and then they've got a perfect backstop to that too, which is anytime that they do start thinking about it and it starts being, they start doubting, then of course that's Satan. Whoever's talking to them and making sense, well, that's Satan inspired, because he's trying to lead you away from God, or she is.
So Darren, since you're the only one here left, I'm going to cut it off, but I want to ask you a question about this. I've been talking about this from a very religious perspective, but I suspect it's possible. In fact, I know it's possible for non-religious people to believe in a Satan that don't believe in God. So it's not actually logically necessary to believe in a good being to believe in an ultimate evil being. Because if you look at the world and you're trying to explain it, you don't necessarily think, oh, there's a supernatural being who's good. Because depending on your perspective, this world's pretty fucked up. And so you might think there's a supernatural being that's evil. And you may not. So there are lots of, I think, superstitions that start with rather than starting with God is good, they start with, Satan is evil. And that's their explanation for everything. Have you ever been tempted to think in that way about some source of evil outside of humanity? It doesn't have to be religious, but if you understand what I'm getting at.
Right. No, but not because of the idea of it. I mean, I could believe in God as well. My biggest stumbling block is that no one's ever been able to demonstrate that the supernatural is even real. So without I mentioned the physics of the supernatural earlier, and that's what's missing for me. Because if you can't demonstrate that the supernatural is even a real thing, then all the claims you make about how it works is complete speculation and completely meaningless for the most part. And all the gods and entities that you say use the supernatural to do different things in the world, that's completely meaningless, because you haven't given me any reason to think that you even know what the supernatural does or how it works or that it even exists. And all of those are built up on top of each other. And without the foundation of, okay, the supernatural exists, this is what it is, this is how we detect it, this is how we know that it's a real thing, then the argument just stops right there. Because without the supernatural, you have no ways the supernatural works. You have no gods. You have no afterlife. You have no karma. You have no reincarnation. You don't have any of that without some sort of demonstration that the supernatural is a real thing. So if they can't demonstrate the supernatural is even a real thing, then it doesn't matter how great their arguments are. They're making an assumption. It's all based on quicksand, because as soon as you pull out that the supernatural exists card and you take a look at it, everything that's built on top of that crumbles away.
Let me ask you one last question. I know I said that would be the last question, but it's always fascinating talking to you about this stuff, because you didn't grow up with this baggage to start with. So it's a different perspective than what I'm used to. Andrew, I know that you're there, and so I'd be curious to get your perspective on this too. But first, Darren, you know who Satan is in the mythology, even if it's all incoherent to you. When a Christian talks about Satan, you know what they mean.
Sometimes.
Right, but just generically speaking, you understand the mythology. When they're talking about Satan, they're not talking about something good. And so if they call you Satan, get thee behind me, Satan, or they say that you are a servant of Satan, or that Satan is that what you're doing is inspired by Satan in some way, or that Satan is possessing you in some way. How does that make you feel? How do you feel about that? Not what you think about that. How do you feel about that?
Probably the same way you would feel if someone came up to you tomorrow and told you that Santa Claus was going to come into your room and beat the shit out of you. Nothing really. I mean, it's a completely, I mean, I feel embarrassed for them mostly, that they believe in that kind of crap, that they've been taken in by the con. I feel, yeah, I guess mostly I just feel sorry for them, that they've been so gullible to actually fall for something so obviously false.
Well, I will just tell you that I feel something different than that. So I think that way that you described, but I feel angry, a little bit hurt, a little bit ashamed for the person who said it. So there's something there too. But I also feel the weight of the insult.
Yeah, but you were also
I don't know how to
indoctrinated
show
into
it, but I know what the insult means, you see. So it doesn't matter to me that I think the mythology is bullshit. I know what it means to the person who's saying it. And from their perspective, they're not saying something like Santa Claus is going to beat the shit out of you. They're saying something that they believe is true, and that it is the most evil, hurtful thing that they can say. It can't get worse than that for them. They couldn't possibly come up with something worse to say. And so I take it in the spirit it's intended. And so I can't help but feel the evil of the thing being said. And it's not a thing that makes me want to examine myself. I can tell you, anytime someone, tries to associate me with a Satan, I don't think to myself, man, could they be right?
Oh yeah.
I think to myself, you asshole, you should die right now. And if there was a Satan, may he torture you in the hell that you think exists for the rest of your life, starting now. That's my thought process. Almost of rage, hatred, and sadness for the humanity lost in that person.
Is that
Um,
because that's would have been your intent had you called someone servant of Satan when you were a Christian?
Yeah, I know exactly what I would have meant.
Yeah. Yeah, see, and
Uh,
I don't have any of that background, so I don't have any of that emotional attachment to it. I just feel sorry for them that
yeah, then
they're,
you don't
you know,
understand what's being said to you.
oh,
Then.
I understand it. It's like when someone calls me, you know, insert any explicative you care to
Well,
insert.
okay, if someone called you a pedophile,
Uh,
that would mean something. That has a meaning that's particularly hurtful, but it's also it would enrage you that it would be untrue, and and to go that far out of bounds to try to smear you in some way. I think that would have some kind of effect.
it
Um,
depends. If it's just directed at me, probably not, because I know, because I can test their claim in my head and know that it's false, so it's not a
right,
big
but
deal.
you know it's
But
false,
but
but
if
they're smearing you with it anyway.
well, if they're going to other people and saying that, then that would piss me off
Right.
because then they're not attacking me, they're attacking my reputation and they're trying to get other people turned against me.
That is what they're doing when they smear you with the Satan accusation, because that's what they think they're
Um,
doing. They for the
maybe,
what
but
I'm trying to explain to you, Darren. In their minds, calling you Satan is worse than calling you a pedophile.
yeah, but at that point, they're only calling me Satan because I'm starting to make sense to them. I mean, that's when they start calling me Satan, is when I actually am starting to make sense to them.
Let me ask you a question, Darren, because once again, it's a difference between perspectives that we've. Andrew, you can jump in here if you want to. We're really almost done here. It's the what do you think a Christian thinks about Satan? A Christian must, if they have the permission to hate anyone, it would be Satan, because he's not a person with a soul like you, and he's not a person who can be redeemed like you, and he is the enemy. And so, what do you think? And by the way, they're looking forward with glee to the time when he gets his. What do you think about? They think about the person who works for him. Well,
Well, yeah,
they
but these are
they
the
feel the
same.
same way.
Well, yeah, but these are the same people that worship a moral monster. So if Satan's against the moral monster, then Satan's maybe not a good guy, but he's not necessarily a bad guy, right?
I understand that, but what I'm trying to get you to understand is
No,
the
I,
weight
I
of what they
no, I
think
understand
about
what the weight they
you.
think they have with that. I understand that. I really do. It just has no emotional effect on me because, well, for one, I've never believed that Satan was like a real thing. Two, I understand with my interaction with Christians in the past that when they start calling me Satan, it's because I actually start making sense to them and it's starting to them to sort of doubt what they're thinking. And
Let me try let me try one more time. Nazi Germany, you're in Nazi Germany. Hitler's at the height of his power, and you're a little swarthy, let's say, and everyone who sees you says, "Hey, he's a Jew." Um,
then I take my swarthy little ass and start running because people with guns are going to be coming.
right, but this is so. Even though no one's coming with guns, this is how they feel. And let's say after Germany loses, people are walking around the cleanup part of the phase, and then someone says, "Oh, he's a Nazi." Um, this is what they are. This is the milder version of
Yeah,
what
no,
Christians are saying when they use the Satan language as weaponized against people. And by the way, if there are any Christians listening to this, you need to understand that that's what you're doing, and you are never helping your case at that point. At that point, you have lost the argument forever. You can never recover from that place in the minds of a person that you've smeared that way. You can never recover. You will always be somewhat despised, and if not despised, at least suspected. Now, as humans, we try to overcome that, right? We can move past it, and we can have even friendly relations with people that we don't really trust, or that people that we're gonna have to give a side eye to, because we would rather live in peace and harmony. But when you have smeared a person that way, you cannot expect that that's gonna ever be okay. It's never gonna be okay. You should stop it. You should never, ever do it. And maybe someone like Darren, who doesn't have the full psychological baggage of understanding where it's all coming from and what it all means and sounds like, maybe that person wouldn't be affected in the same way. But a lot of the non-Christians you're talking to were Christians. We know exactly what the worldview is. We know exactly where you're coming from. We know exactly what you're saying. There's some things that can't be unsaid, not completely. So you should really think twice before you start using that language. I can tell you right now, in some parts of the country, this is why atheists don't come out, because it's dangerous. It's dangerous because the Christians actually think, oh, that person's satanic. Well, what do you think those people drive around in those pickup trucks with Hemis and gun racks are going to do to you, Mr. Servant of Satan? You don't always come out alive in those situations. This is dangerous talk. You should never do it. And you are borderline mentally retarded when you do that sort of thing. I know I'm using very strong language here, so I don't believe that anyone that I interact with is mentally retarded at all. But that's how far you've gone when you go that far. And you go ahead, Andrew. I was wrapping up. It's you know what I'm talking about, Andrew, because you live there. I
do, and I drive a Hemi.
I know,
but it doesn't have a. I know I did that. I saw that. I saw it does not have a gun rack
or the additional towing package. I understand.
See, I wasn't going there. I think the thing that really bothers me, and this bothers me in a way that would take some unpacking. So don't, if you don't want to, but when you're a servant of Satan or you're demon possessed, or when one of those things is said, very often I'm in a conversation where I'm actually trying to accomplish some good. So what might some of those circumstances be? I've said before, I think even on SNS, that I am an activist for certain causes, but none of those causes disadvantage any segment of the population. In fact, the things that I'm an activist for are to help marginalized people, right? And yet I do get the servant of Satan thing. So where is one of those? We just had a conversation. We just had a conversation about abortion, right? And in fact, in that conversation, I personally was called a baby killer. I've been called a baby killer by Christians. But it's not that I am pro-abortion, right? I'm pro-choice. That doesn't mean I want That doesn't mean that I want the world to turn to abortion. I'd rather them not, right? But this is when that language can come out. It's not the only place it comes out. I wasn't a Donald Trump fan. You don't think I was in the very conversation where within my extended family, where I was criticizing Donald Trump, is in another one of those places where I was called a baby killer. Had nothing to do with the conversation, right? And that person in my extended family, I really thinks I am demon possessed. This is a person that believes very deeply in demon possession. The problem is that in every situation that I have been in where that kind of thing has been said, I actually want to do good. And Christians say this sort of thing like, you're a servant of Satan. And then at that point, it's not possible to have a meeting of the minds in the conversation anymore. And that is the poison that I think is the worst of all of this.
Right.
If it is in your nature to say that the person you're talking to is a servant of Satan, or they're demon possessed, or they're evil incarnate, or pick your language, at that point, you can no longer spot the good that they're trying to do. And that's why those words ought not even be in our human vocabulary.
Rational discourse is impossible at that point. I mean, I'm trying to describe how I feel, and I know I've said a lot of things that sound more extreme than I actually feel. I don't harbor,
dude. You just
I don't harbor hate in my heart for anybody at the moment, and I actually have some degree of love for all of the people that I interact with. So I think that needs to be said. But when that kind of accusation comes out, it literally interrupts the synapses in my brain that allow for rational discourse. So there's, at that point, whatever I say after that comes out is probably not rational. And I can tell you further that there's nothing that I could say to that person at that point that would be remotely as bad as what they have said to me.
Yeah.
And you simply have no right to take offense to anything anyone says after I mean, that's the nuclear option, right? So all I can do is fire some howitzers, but it's not nearly as bad in their economy of bad. There's nothing that I can say worse than that for them. And that's why they're saying it. They're saying the worst thing that they can think of to say. There is nothing worse in the universe for them than that. And that's what you've been painted with. And what you're being asked to do at that point is to continue the conversation as rationally as you were trying to continue it before. And for me, that is not possible. I can assure you, even if I say things that make sense after that, and even if I don't seem like I am upset, I am emotionally compromised in that conversation after that. And I don't even want to ever talk to that person again. I will, because I can get over it. I'm a grown up, and I can move past that moment. But that's the thing. That's the assault happening upon the person when that comes out. And it should never happen if you ever intend to be taken seriously, and to have conversations with people that you are gonna maybe try to love at some point.
There are two more things, Darren. If you want to step in, please do. I know you had something to say.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay, so there are two things that bother me once this happens. You don't know what comes next with that person. Once you're compared, to Satan, or once you're called a servant of Satan or whatever. If it was just that, and the conversation ended there, right? If they just took their marbles and went home, that would be fine. But that's not where it ends. And the trouble with this sort of comparison is you don't know what that person might do next. Maybe, and I certainly hope that the vast majority of SNS listeners have never wondered what the person is going to do next, that they don't face a situation where they're compared to Satan or called a servant of Satan, or that they're being it's being said that they're demon possessed. I certainly hope that most people don't have that experience. But if you've grown up in the areas that I grew up in, you've seen the sorts of things that follow that. The things like church bombings and church shootings, just as one, for instance. Mothers that kill their children, because they think the children are demon possessed. You really don't know what comes next. And even if the conversation continues from there in the hateful tone that it will inevitably take, what that person is saying to you is they can't wait for you to burn in hell, even if they're not willing to send you there right then.
Right.
They
And some,
gleefully they'll gleefully stand at the handrails of heaven, looking down into the pits of hell and smile while you burn.
Oh yeah, I've had Christians actually tell me that.
right. We've heard that, I want to say this week or within the last couple of weeks on the board. It does come up every now and then, because the idea, I mean, the thing that you have to think in your mind as a Christian is, if you are an unrepentant servant of Satan, that the world and certainly the afterworld is better off with you not in it. You need to be quarantined or punished or tormented or whatever is going to happen to you. That's a good thing when that happens, and the Christian has to be looking forward to that.
And then they wonder why we call their God a repugnant God.
Right. It's such a warped view. But I mean, just this is why I say whatever the response is after you hear that, it may be offensive, it may be out of bounds. This is nowhere near as close to being as offensive as and out of bounds as that. So to think about it in a completely secular way. Let's say a person has cancer, some kind of nasty form of pancreatic cancer, because there are some of those forms that are not as bad, but that's a pretty nasty cancer when you got the bad stuff. If you were to say to that person, I don't care what kind of person they were, I look forward to you suffering in torment from this cancer. I can't wait until it happens. It'll be a good thing. Just, try to hear the sound of that being said. And we're just talking about torturous pancreatic cancer. If you're describing what the Christian thinks of as Satan and the afterlife, the punishment that he and his angels deserve, and then you have the reality that that's what they are waiting for longingly to happen to you. This is why atheists don't come out. It's so much safer for homosexuals to come out in Utah than it is for an atheist to come out almost anywhere.
Actually, the Northwest is pretty easygoing for atheists.
Well, having lived in the Northwest, I can tell you the Northwest is pretty, they have their religious pockets, but yes, I agree. It's better to be an atheist in the Northwest than it is the Southeast. The Northeast is also pretty easygoing, but we're full of religions, just a different a different brand of religion. And the thing is, you don't know what kind of religious crazy you're going to be around. So they're everywhere. And that's why it's, you just never know. You don't know. And when you're around someone who uses this kind of satanic demonic possession language, it's the scariest language that an atheist can hear. You're probably not going to come out around that person in real life when you hear someone talk that way. It doesn't matter what part of the country you live in.
I've got a question for you. It's one of those Sunday school unpermitted questions. One of those things that we didn't even know that we could ask. Right?
Oh yeah, that would be all of the stuff we've talked about today.
Right. So I've got another one, and I just wonder if you had thought of this as a Christian, what you'd have thought. So thinking about the fall of Satan and the third of the angels that followed him, could God have healed Satan's mind? Could God have taken away his covetousness? So, since that was the prominent story in our part of the world, right? Satan coveted God's power, and that's why it was that's his sin. Okay. So could God have healed Satan's mind, his covetousness? And if not, why not? It seems to be the kind of prayer that humans can pray, and we expect God to step in.
It created me a clean heart, oh God. Sure.
Holy Spirit, right?
The answer is you're right. Nobody would ask that question, and not even in a casual Bible class setting. What I thought about it at the time, I didn't think about it. So, and if I had thought about it, I'd have backed away from it, I think, fairly quickly. But thinking about it now, of course, this is part of why the story is incoherent. Because if Satan was, the perfect little angel, if you will, except for this one little flaw, then there's a kind of a thought process you can go through, which is, would Satan be happier if he did not have this pride problem? So if you think about a person who has a mental illness today, there's a kind of mental illness that a person can have where we will, against their will, take them and lock them up in a mental ward, and we'll pump them full of drugs. Now, why will we do that? Or is it because we're being immoral? No. Is it because we don't care about people's quote unquote free will? No, that's not it at all. But we know that this person is in such a state that we have to, as human beings, assume that person would be happier if we could fix them, because they're broken in a way that they even don't understand that they're broken, in a way that they cannot fix themselves. They can't be talked into being fixed. It's not possible. And so we have to exercise our judgment that we love this person enough to say they would be happier if we could fix them. If we just give them the right medicine, they can get back out in the world and live a better life than what they've got right now. And so when God sees Satan going wrong, shouldn't there be some part of him that says, I see what the problem is. I've got the drug. I could fix it. You would be so much happier if I fixed it. The third of the angels wouldn't run away if I fixed it. I've got the medicine right here. I could do it. But nope, you've got your free will.
I want to just, if you don't mind, I want to.
Sure. No, I just got ranty. Sorry about that.
No. So look, this really is going to be the last thing I have to say on this subject, because it came up today. And somebody out there is thinking, well, one of the Christians said that when Satan was created, for at least some period of time in heaven, he had a mind. I'm pretty sure this was Dell. He had a mind that was aligned toward the will of God. that he for some period of time was doing good, right? That was his free will choice. This is hugely important to the story, because there was a version of Satan prior to the fall, according to this line of thought, that was a perfectly happy free will agent aligned with God, living happily in heaven. And then at some point, Satan becomes covetous. Now, why this shift is important is because it was actually in the Christian God's best interest to heal Satan too. It wasn't as if this was a person, a being who from the beginning had gone wrong and they were happy that way. That's not the story that was told on your show today. The story that was told on your show today was Satan was a happy free will agent of God that at some point encountered a diminished will, and that's when he went wrong. And this God that was loudly promoted through the whole show didn't see it fit to simply strengthen that being's will so that they could continue in happy accord with God. And I will simply say that as a skeptic, if that is the God you worship, count me out.
Well, Andrew, if he'd fixed his will, then he wouldn't have been able to save as many souls as possible, because Satan had to fall and we all had to do horrible things to each other.
Darren Lute, I strangle you again. You are strangled. With that,
so we need to find like a little icon or something that has like 2 hangman nooses on my name?
Yeah, you're done. You're done, Darren. Your mic privileges have been taken. Where's
Devil needs to be holding the little noose.
You have lost your mic privileges, my friend.
So anyway, that bothered me, Dave, from your show today. I thank you for putting it on, because this is the incoherence in one paragraph that bothers me as deeply as any story can bother me that people are committed to.
Yeah. This, if there was a Christian story without a Satan that I could have glommed on to in my last days as a Christian, and if someone could have told that story in a convincing way, I might have tried to hang on longer. In fact, I did try some things that just it was too late, couldn't take by then. But if there was some version of Christianity that didn't have to shoehorn this Satan character in it, someone could at least make a better case. But any Christianity with this guy in it is doomed for me. It's doomed. Any God with where this Satan is real is no God of mine. And Lord knows I've tried. So yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hanging on. I'm going to bug out, and I guess I've got to do some editing, damn it. But such is life. And the two of you will be talking to next week. Although if this show airs somewhere in the middle of the summer, then we already had that conversation. So sorry about the timey-wimey nature of podcasts, but I appreciate everybody hanging on. And if we don't do any more shows after the time that you hear this, hopefully it'll be enough to feed the comments for the off season. Thanks, guys. Bye.